Good afternoon.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's a joy to have you here. It's a really special, special day for us. My name is Paola Prestini, if you don't know me. I'm the co-founder, composer, and artistic director here at National Sawdust. And one of the kind of most powerful reasons for me for this place to exist is to really create a space for artists from all walks of life to come together, and to do so in a deep professional development setting. And so today is open to our residents who come from many different walks of life, many different programs here at National Sawdust, to come and to learn from the pathways and the lives of these extraordinary artists. So we're really happy to have you here today, and really happy to have you here today. I'm going to introduce our guests, who you all know, but I'm still going to give an introduction, and then talk a little bit about some things about them that you don't know, because I think often, when you have such stellar careers as a genius composer and a world-renowned soprano, you know them on that level, but then there's all this impact work that they're doing out in the world to make this world a better place, and so we're going to dive into that a little bit. So just quick introduction. Renée Fleming, who's a member of our Artistic Advisory Board here at National Sawdust, is a world-renowned as a singer, performing in opera, concerts on Broadway, and on momentous occasions such as the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony and the Super Bowl. She's also a committed arts advocate and educator, leading programs at Carnegie Hall and the Aspen Music School. In her role as artistic advisor to the Kennedy Center, she launched a collaboration with the National Institutes of Health, focused on the science connecting music, health, and the brain. Over the past year, on her own initiative, she has given more than 35 presentations with scientists and practitioners on this subject from Boston to Beijing, including delivering the Compton Lecture at MIT and earning Research America's Rosenfield Award for impact on public opinion. And Tod Machover is the Muriel R. Cooper Professor of Music and Media and Director of the Media Lab's Opera of the Future group at MIT. He's been called a musical visionary by the New York Times and America's most wired composer by the LA Times. He has been both composer, inventor, praised for creating music that breaks traditional artistic and cultural boundaries, and for developing technologies that expand music's potential for everyone, from celebrated virtuosi to musicians of all abilities. He studied with Elliott Carter and Roger Sessions at Juilliard, and was the first director of musical research at IRCAM in Paris. It's a joy to have you both here today, and just a little bit about what we're going to cover. And I think one of the things that I think is so powerful about having you both here is the synergy between you both, which is really curiosity, evolution, and a collaborative drive to make the ecosystems we live in a better place. And you've done this through rigor in your craft, innovation, and community building. And you're also tied by your common belief in the therapeutic potential of music. And you've explored this in many different initiatives. And so I'm going to start maybe just with how you both met. And I think that'll kind of serve as a springboard, and then we'll talk to you, Renée, a little bit, and I know you have some questions also for the audience. So maybe how you first met.
We met socially, I think, and just it was such an engaging conversation. You meet Peter. Half of the wonderful things that have happened to me have happened as a result of either events or dinner parties. So accept your invitations is the advice there.
If she's going to be there, then you can
yeah. And then we sort of talked about music. I mean, that's where we connected, and especially my love for new music and your work, because I wrote a couple of now, at least 2 terrific operas, maybe more.
And so we met at various places over the years, but just about a year ago, Renée was invited to MIT to deliver what's called the Compton Lecture, and which is interesting because it's a very prestigious lecture, but it's also meant to be something to make people at MIT think about the implications of what they're doing in a way they might not otherwise, and also to be able to speak at a level that people from many, many different fields, and often engineers and scientists who might be kind of fixed in their fields, would really have their minds opened and actually their minds blown. And so Renée came and gave a spectacular talk about music in the mind, packed hall of from undergrads to Nobel Prize winners, the whole gamut, and made a huge impression. And when she was there, MIT with Renée had organized a colloquium with about 15 to 20 graduate students from many different departments of MIT that I helped to put together. And that was really, actually, it was that colloquium that allowed us to sit with these terrific young people to talk about music in the mind. And I think that's when we really connected and started talking about interconnected interests.
So Renee, can you tell us a little bit about Music in the Mind and sound health, and also just, at this point in your life, what drew you to this? Was there a specific moment, something that kind of unlocked in you to take this path?
So, a few of you are singers, I think, right? And musicians, yes. So singing, certainly in classical music and at the virtuosic level of 3 centuries of opera, requires a mind-body connection and a kind of an unlocking of a really unruly instrument. It reminds me of sort of learning how to ride horses, because the horse has a mind of its own and isn't thinking the way you're thinking. That's learning to sing. So I developed over time. Also, I had terrible stage fright. Developed tremendous somatic pain that accompanied my performances and my preparation for performance, and it would be at times frightening, because I think I just can't go on. There's no way I'm going to be able to sing with my neck and shoulders locked like this, and then it would magically lift right when I went on stage. So I knew it wasn't real. I mean, I knew it wasn't like a real physical ailment. And so this got me thinking, of course, about the mind-body connection, which early in my career was not acknowledged by medicine. They said, no, it doesn't there is no connection. Your mind does not, subconsciously affect your body other than to make it work. So I was always interested then, in just following research as it came out, armchair reading, armchair science. And I suddenly saw that researchers were looking at music. And I thought, why? Why are they studying music? And I met Dr. Francis Collins, who's the head of the NIH, National Institutes of Health, at a party, dinner party. And because I had just been appointed as a sort of an artistic advisor at the Kennedy Center, I said, how about if we collaborate, 2 huge national institutions, and let's kind of talk about science and bring science to, we'll give you a platform. Because it's interesting, and I think other people are interested in it. So that's been going on now for about 3 years, and and I've taken it on tour with my performances too.
So is it after performances, or does it take the form of workshops? Again, and who are the people who are in the audience who are receiving the kind of,
Well,
the wealth of
I
information?
tour most of the time and have for years, and so I just offered it to the performing arts institutions, or whether it's a presenter or an orchestra or an opera house, opera company, and I say, I have this presentation. Let's connect with a local university or researchers or healthcare providers or music therapists to present their research and their work to your public, and it gives you a chance to also connect. And we're all service providers for our communities. Artists are, and so are healthcare providers. And let's, see if there's a synergy between us. So this has been really embraced by almost everyone on tour, and the public is my public. Right. Typically, so anywhere from 200 to 1,200 people come to these extra events that are on other days. I can't sing every day, so we're like weightlifters, and so I usually have a day off, or even 2 days in some cities, and so it's just a fascinating use of time.
And for this room, there's a lot of practicing artists in this room, and people who are also making it their life to basically incubate and bring art into the world. It's also for them, I imagine, because you're going to Juilliard, I think, this week, right, to give
Right.
this talk. Can you talk a little bit about, just health in the daily life of an artist, and how we approach our own health, and how this.
Well, it's funny because all of us have some powerful, as artists, connection to health. And whether it's because we're isolated in our work, whether it's because our work tortures us in some way, we know about the mental and emotional draws on being an artist and what that means. And of course, there are also some physical taxing things that we do. It could be standing all day. It could be that your eyes get tired or whatever. But I would really love to hear from each of you about any concerns you have, what you think about, what you see in the community, and how you think also that your art affects other people and their health. because now we're really, I think, worldwide suffering. There's a global epidemic of loneliness and isolation, and we don't really understand the causes of it. We can, guess a little bit, but I personally believe in the healing power of art to bring people together, just to make people talk again, to make people communicate, to the social cohesion is one of the greatest purposes that art has had over the years. And in fact, what I've understood about music and neuroscience is that it all points to evolution, that we just don't change that quickly. And for millennia, certainly rhythm, melody, and chanting or doing something together has been incredibly powerful.
So maybe just as I'm going to go on to Tod in a second, but just in terms of Renee's question, for any artist or anybody in here in the room who's connected to art in their everyday life, are there questions surrounding health, mental health, things that you think about that you might have, you might want to bring up as a springboard for discussion? Skip.
At age 27, I had tendonitis for 2 years, and had to stop playing. Started doing all kinds of other things that never took into my practice. But I'm finding that age hits a lot of young musicians because what we're doing is a micromusculature sport, and I wish people would tell them that from the get-go.
Yeah.
I'm still meeting musicians. I just played with, composing something for a high school outside of Boston, and the lead cello player was great, was taught wrong, and his hands are fucked up now. And he's 19, 18, 17, and I just wish that was part of the conversation. Your coach shouldn't fuck up your body, and you're going to have some injuries because you are an athlete. I just wish that was in. I wish I had known that. So when I was trying to do this punk flamenco shit, I knew I should relax my body or whatever.
Yeah.
I just wish that was in the dialogue in high school from the get-go. Because I'm meeting young musician after young musician, usually in their late 20s, Saturn returns, something happens.
Yeah, it's almost like you would need a school after school, because I think there's so much emphasis placed on, what do you do when you leave school? What do you, how are you going to kind of bridge into professional life? But there's really little talk about the evolution of a career and what it means to sustain a career in a healthy way. And I think mental health is something that, specifically in conservatories and training, everyone's scared to talk about, which is kind of silly because most people go into the arts because they deal with mental health issues, which they channel into beauty and transcendence. But the reality is you struggle with it on an everyday basis.
No question. I'm going to ask Damien about that because I think preventative care for musicians is important. Dancers also.
Stretching,
Well, I think there's a much higher rate now of vocal injury because there's this pressure to be loud. Now we have huge opera houses in this country, and there's in recent years, rather than a focus on how I learned, which is projecting, we're like human ventriloquists. It's more about power, and that really wrecks the voice. So I'll ask about that. They should have healthcare providers coming in early, freshman year, and talking about those issues.
So you have a long career.
Yeah.
Now I have to take 2 years off. And I'm not the only one I've talked to.
Yeah.
Such a good point.
Just quickly, I think the kind of more general pressure to cram a huge amount into your career quickly is much bigger than music. Just the other day, I was sitting at a promotion case for a young professor at MIT, one of the smartest, most brilliant engineers, a guy who reinvented radar, all this incredible stuff. So it was clear, he's 26 or 27 or something, and sitting around the table, we all said exactly the same thing, which is, this is incredible work, but he's got to slow down, and he's got to see, each of these things is fantastic, but they're deeper. If you don't slow down and give the time, and you'll in fact ruin your life. and balancing those two things, excellence and vision, and the kind of compulsion we all feel to do our work with. Just taking care of yourself and giving yourself the time to do things deeply it's just so hard to do, and so it's really important.
Yeah.
It's really hard right now because when I was coming up, with books and putting on a record, and now whatever you're into, if you're into jaw harp, there's all these guys on YouTube, playing Ukrainian-made jaw harps. You could go down a deep rabbit hole with just jaw harps. So the level you're exposed to.
I know.
Eating,
I know, it doesn't make you feel better either to see the...
We have some, other, any,
Any other thoughts on your
Hannah,
Yes.
Katie?
And I think with, in terms of like taking care of yourself and time management, how would, and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but how would you describe the importance of learning when to say no?
Oh.
No, that's incredibly great. That's a beautiful word.
That's what I'm in the process of.
Yeah, I wasn't great at it either, for a long time, doing too much. I was good at saying no to the wrong things. So a lot of what we have to do is repertoire based, is, yes to this role, no to that role. But it's also, time management. It's also saying, no, I need some space today, or I have hard rules about not doing things on performance days. And I have found when I break that, and if I break it, I regret it, because I'm that much less focused in the performance. So,
And I think it's something that you learn, as you evolve in your career, you have to say no more, whereas at the beginning, there's a lot of yes in order to kind
Yeah.
of make it. So it's a hard moment to understand that transition of self-care versus just what it takes to actually, be able to break through and create a sustainable career. So it's a hard bridge, that yes-no
well,
balance.
it comes from, ultimately, it stems from know thyself.
Yeah.
It's really, you have to know what your limitations are.
Absolutely.
But I think especially for mentoring younger artists, it's one of the most important things to help people try to understand. I remember I just saw my mom this morning. She's 91, and she, for years she would say to me, we'd talk on the phone, I'd tell her, and she said, you can say no. And I'd go, okay, sure. But it took a long,
It's a lifelong.
You're absolutely right, though. It's absolutely terrible to do too many things, and also.
So I want to shift for a second from this idea of self-responsibility to civic responsibility, because in essence, the work that you both have done really, deeply dives into civic responsibility. Renée with this initiative, but also with your, giving opportunities to so many people through your work with Chicago and at the Kennedy Center. And then Tod, with your works, both at MIT, where you're training a next generation, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about, the opera lab there, the idea of opera technology. How does that work? And then I'd love for you to talk a little bit about city symphonies, because I think that's such a profound idea of who creates music, who gets to create music. What does virtuosity mean, and how can that go hand in hand with the idea that everyone deserves to create? So if you can take us a little bit through those two.
Okay, so we can. I'll give you a quick idea of what's going on at MIT, and we can talk about that more later. But MIT itself is unusual. It's as you know, it's a science technology school, but it was started. Actually, can anybody guess when MIT was started? People usually get it wrong. Any idea? Like, how old do you think it is?
1850s?
Say again?
1850s?
Oh my God, that's pretty good. Yeah, actually, it was started in 1861, right? So it's over 150 years old, which is people don't usually know. And it was started at a time when a lot of people we were talking before, and as Paola said, right now is a time when most of the old large institutions, both artistic and actually academic, aren't really working so well anymore. And so people are trying to invent new institutions like this one, and it's a transition to make old ones change. But in 1860, it was similar, where people were trying to figure out how to take engineering and science and design in general and put them together. So like the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, Imperial College in London, MIT were all started at the same time. The reason I say that is that MIT is a very unusual institution. It's not like we have this other place called Harvard next door, which is really, really different. Harvard's like a typical university. MIT is a very entrepreneurial place that kind of reinvents itself for whatever it needs to do. And the Media Lab, where I work, is kind of an invention. We give graduate degrees, and we also give, it's also a research institution. And basically, we're united by trying to make life better for people. It might involve technology, it might involve science, but it doesn't necessarily have to. So we're a collection of really unusual kind of backgrounds. Artists, education-oriented people. The guy who has the lab next to me is the world's best prosthetics designer. He lost both of his legs when he was 17 in a mountain climbing accident, and has devoted his life to making artificial limbs that are better than natural limbs. I'm actually going to see right after this, someone named Neri Oxman, who you might not know, but her one-person show is about to open in a week at MoMA, so you will know about her. She's an architect who makes architecture based on biology and nature, so she grows buildings. There's actually something at which will open at MoMA, which is a pavilion spun by silkworms, which were trained by light and food to spin. Yeah, it's cool, actually, and it's incredibly light. You can like lift, anyway. So it's a very interesting combination of people. I've been there for a while, and my lab is called Opera of the Future. Originally it was called Hyper Instruments, because I'm also very interested in making instruments that know how they're being played, know not just what's played, but what the meaning of it is, so somebody can play naturally and spin a much larger web than just what the instrument does, all because the instrument knows how to extrapolate. And we could, opera, I don't think I ever told Renee this, but when I was growing up in the New York area, opera wasn't my favorite thing. I'm a cellist. I, love chamber music and rock music, and came to opera little by little, because for me it's the form that gives you freedom to unite all the senses and all of the art forms with music at the core, whatever that means. And so in my work, the different operas I've done, each one has been quite different one from another, and I've had the liberty at MIT to make a lab where we can imagine a pretty unusual project and bring together a group of people to realize different aspects of it. There's usually some new set of ideas or inventions that come out of it. Some of what we do isn't opera, but a lot of it is in some way. And I could tell you more about that in a minute, but this idea of city symphonies was one idea that came to me along the way, about 5 or 6 years ago, and there were kind of two reasons behind it. One is that the Toronto Symphony Orchestra just happened to ask me to write a symphony, and I knew them, so I knew they were an adventurous and really devoted organization. I think we all know that to do the kind of unusual work we do, you either have to build an institution or find incredible collaborators. You have to pick very carefully who you work with. So I know they were really great. They came to me because they knew I would probably propose something unusual, and they were sort of ready for that. And I have 2 daughters. At that time, our younger daughter was about 14. And I saw that she was all of her friends were, most of her friends were online, and a new piece of music would come out. It could be Renee's recording, or Lady Gaga, or, string quartet, Kronos quartet, something. And they'd listen to the original once, and then people would start modifying it, and they'd send, it was like the old game of telephone. They'd make their own versions, and they'd send it around, and they'd kind of communicate through either, riffs off of that music or mashups. And so I've been really interested in making it possible for anybody to create music, even kids, for a long time. And when I saw this, I was thrilled. I said, oh my God, here's this whole generation, and they're actually making their own music, and nobody's telling them. And then I noticed that lots of people were sharing these things, and it was really exciting for a little while, and then it kind of tapered off. It didn't allow everybody to make incredible work. It all became kind of the same. And so with this project in Toronto, I thought, what would it be like if we created a new kind of relationship between experts in music, like the orchestra, or, like I've been doing music for a while, and the general public? What if we could create a situation where everybody could communicate to make a piece together? So I proposed to Toronto that I wanted to make a symphony about the city of Toronto. I wanted to use the orchestra, but I also wanted to listen to the city, figure out what it was about the city that made it special. And then I wanted to invite everybody in Toronto who wanted to, if we could, tens of thousands of people, to actually participate in making this piece. And unfortunately, the orchestra said, oh yeah, that's a great idea, because I had no idea how to do this. But then we figured that, we worked on this model, and so we've developed this idea of making a large community symphony with whoever lives in that community, and it's become a project not just to make a piece of music, but through music to allow people to communicate and argue and think about not just where they are, but what the issues are that are really important to them. And so we've done this a variety of places.
How did the collaboration work? I knew you had folded in sounds from the city, but how did the collaboration with the citizens work?
So at the very beginning, we thought that what we could do, we had a lot of the Canadian Broadcasting Company was behind it. We had a pretty easy job getting the message out. We thought that we could just let people know, ask people to send in sounds, and then create a community online. And we launched it, and within a week, I could see we had lots of people responding, but I could see that everybody responding were already people who knew about the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, and were already, so I said, that's not going to work. We can't do it online. So we hired a few people to figure out in the community how to bring people together in person, and so we met with the mayor and the head of the school system and the head of every, arts community organization, people all over town, basically, first of all, to propose things, like here's what we think you might want to do to contribute, and then to ask people what they wanted to do to contribute. And so we evolved a model over months of, we have composing software that people can use. We got that through about a quarter of the school system for all of Toronto. We had, weekly, we'd send out a request of, we'd love if you can find a sports-oriented sound that, would be surprising to people, or something related to water because Toronto's on the lake. And, we'd send out challenges, and then people would send, people sent sounds. We did workshops where we'd bring people together who didn't usually. Actually, the most fun one was I took the youth symphony. We did a public thing where I had taken a bunch of recordings from the lake and the river around Toronto and made a kind of 1-minute collage. And I brought the youth orchestra on stage, and I said, okay, I'm going to play you this recording. You've never heard it before. And listen once, and then I'll play it again, and then I want you to tell me what's in the, what you hear in the recording. We did that a couple of times. Then I said, okay, now we're going to get rid of the recording. Let's see if we can make this just with your instruments. This was just the beach and waves and the seagulls and a couple of people talking. And so after about 20 minutes, I have a video of this, not here, but after about 20 minutes, this group of 17-year-olds are playing, the ocean and the lake from Toronto, and you absolutely can't tell the difference. So anyway, we did a whole bunch of things. And
So one thing that strikes me is, these are complex dreams, that these dreams that you're putting out into the world of creating, these kinds of engagements, of creating these kinds of initiatives, they're complex. And I think one of the things that we don't have in the arts, which you do have in the sciences, and you're kind of bridging that at MIT, is the idea of research and development. In the arts, that's actually not something that we talk about a lot. We talk about product, but the process is a very lonely process, and it's one that, here at Sawdust, we've been trying to kind of demystify by really mentoring and kind of putting our arms around processes, but it's a lonely process. And so I'm wondering, just because the two of you have, created these really powerful initiatives and evolved careers, if you can just give us a little window into when you're trying to create something, what demystifying that process looks like. And I think for those of us in the room that are trying to put together careers in a time where there's very little infrastructure, there's very little support, just kind of hearing from you both, a little bit of demystifying the process. Renée, for example, you took it on your own self to do this initiative. What did that look like? You're obviously able to call certain people, but what did that look like to put that together? And Tod as well.
I'd actually be curious, we never really talked about it, but how the kind of collaboration you're involved in now with the Music and Health Initiative, how that compares to working in large opera. I mean, you've been collaborating for all your projects for a long time, and what differences have?
Well,
How it feeds you.
this is complicated because there are other things that I've had to do on my own. Even just singing the national anthem for the Super Bowl, they said, we want you to do the national anthem. Oh, but the NFL is a not-for-profit, so you have to raise your own money and produce your own segment. And I was surprised. NFL, not-for-profit.
I didn't know that was the deal. What?
Yeah. Now. No, and in fact, if you have the halftime show, and it used to be record companies would foot the bill for this. No more. They can't. They hardly, barely exist anymore. And the same is true for the halftime show. Somebody, a promoter or somebody has to come up with the money to pay for all of that. In my case,
Never thinks, at your level that you're thinking about those types of
know.
things. So I think it's really important
was
for us in
interesting.
the
I
room
mean,
to hear that.
Well-
that kind of self-initiative is actually something that, if you're really trying to break boundaries,
You also have to do it in secret. You can't tell anybody, not a soul, that you're doing the national anthem, but you have to somehow get an arranger and the orchestra to play it and the recording session. And then the other example, I think when I started doing this as a consultant to a major company, both at Lyric Opera, because I brought the musicals to Lyric Opera, which has now become a hugely successful initiative for them. And I also brought Second City. Second City is the best brand coming out of Chicago that's not a sports brand. And so they wrote Second City Guide to the Opera, which was hysterical. And, these types of collaborations, for me, it was all about audience development. How do we get people in the door who might not even like opera and who have never seen this gorgeous theater that is the best kept secret? You can't see it on the street. You don't even know. It looks like an office building. And so that's where it came from, these creative ideas, and then getting buy-in from everyone there, because nobody works for me. When you're a consultant, nobody works for you. And then the Chicago Voices, which came from American Voices. That was really tough to produce too, again because it was a little too ambitious. You learn with experience what's possible and what is really stretching people too far. But this Music in the Mind thing has really been easy and fun. I was in China for the month of October, and they've really embraced it there 100%. And the will to do things there is so tremendous. And of course, it's tragic now. I mean, it was tragic then because I was in Hong Kong for a week during some of the worst and most painful protests.
Let's take a moment because we have two clips that I think might be nice to just springboard us into the conversation also for you in terms of breaking down the process of death and the powers.
It's an exciting time in neuroscience where we're beginning to understand how the brain interacts with the environment. And music is a really important part of the environment. And we're starting to learn ways in which music can influence all kinds of other aspects of one's brain function, and especially how we could use that information to use music therapeutically in an even more powerful way. This initiative aims to bring together communities that haven't necessarily gotten to know each other that well yet. The neuroscientists and the actual composers, performers, musicians who have the full grasp of the power of music and the variety of different styles.
I think we're ready to get you set up in the scanner.
Great.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. We're going to start our first scan.
What is life? I cannot cross over.
This is just a video about an experiment I did at the NIH. The NIH gives away billions and billions of dollars every year in funding for music research, for health research.
In terms of the application of this study, it can go towards I imagine all different things from Alzheimer's to,
Well, the fMRI is now sort of the what we've talked about, how it's maybe not the ideal technology, but it's what we have right now to look at the brain during specific activities. It measures blood oxygen levels in the brain and shows you also where those pick up. And so there were different results for me in this experiment for singing, imagining, and speaking. And imagining was the most powerful. It affected more parts of the brain than any other activity, which they were surprised. There were several scientists from around the country who were looking at the results, and they were totally surprised. They expected
What
the
was
actual singing to be
What
more
was the
powerful.
instruction for imagining? They said imagine anything?
There was
or-
no instruction. No, it was the same segment of music. So, and they finally said, well, this is obviously because you're a singer, so the singing part is second nature. And the imagining part took extra attention because of the noise and the,
Right.
it was a focus issue. So I don't know, but it's what you're doing. In fact, I hope Tod will speak about some of the things that I got to see when I was at MIT. Is extraordinary, and also where the technology can go. It will eventually, evolve to be able to measure extraordinary things in real time without people having to be in a massive machine. It's the potential is tremendous for understanding the brain. And that's why the NIH is doing this.
They're doing this so that they can understand and then be able to apply it into different types of
Absolutely.
therapeutic
And it's
strategies.
creativity is something they're really interested in, and it's something that is highly underrated. And it shouldn't be, because it's the foundation for all of innovation and everything really that we've created as human beings.
I mean, there's so many things to be looked at now in terms of music and health. The science is getting good enough to actually measure what music, how music influences people. I think for a long time we had intuitions that all kinds of things were happening, but we couldn't really measure it and couldn't build on it. But it's so exciting now because you're starting to. So one of the things, we've worked on this in various ways, but one specific thing which I think leads to some of the next kinds of developments is some of my colleagues at MIT found out a couple of years ago they were trying to reverse or find any kind of cure for Alzheimer's disease. They were trying all kinds of different things, and one thing they were trying was actually sensory input. So they had mice in little translucent boxes, and they were trying air temperature and light, and they finally were trying flashing lights at different speeds. And when light was flashing at 40 hertz, that's 40 times a second, they noticed that the mice were all of a sudden very alert, so something was going on. And then they tried the same thing with older mice who were just older, so kind of tired. And they also became more alert after exposure to these lights flashing. And then they found out, then they tried with mice bred with Alzheimer's disease who, couldn't find their way through a maze and were completely just lethargic. And after some hours, maybe a day of exposure to these same flashing lights, the mice with Alzheimer's disease became alert and could find their way through a maze, and it was amazing, literally. And that's when actually, June, my wife, who's over there, actually knew the people. It was completely by accident. She knew the scientists at MIT who were doing this research, happened to have lunch with them, and they were saying, well, we'd like to try this with audio. It seems to work with lights, might it work with audio? And so, maybe we should all get together. So my group started working with this team of neuroscientists, and sure enough, it turned out that audio at 40 hertz, which is like the low E on a piano, does the same thing. It made the mice alert, and it turns out that the 40 hertz signal dilates the arteries in the brain where plaque builds up for Alzheimer's that makes it difficult for signals to pass. So the plaque goes away and the brain becomes clearer. So it wasn't just a mystery. And so based on that, we've been doing research for the last couple of years about what combination of light and sound, vibration. I have a student who's a specialist in smell, so how you can use the different senses together to augment this result. There's a big article in the New York Times showing the results that with sound and light together, the results are more than double. It's crazy. So whether or not this is, we'll see how far this goes. But what's so exciting about it is that when you talk about music and health and music in the mind, this is one of the first glimpses of a very particular kind of music, or something you can actually do that can be traced to something very specific in the mind. May not be the only thing you want to do, but it shows that there's a huge field out there. There must be all kinds of other sensory inputs that we can create that target something very specific in your mental state and physical state. And I think therapeutically it's huge, but I also think that musically it's huge, because I think, so I have one student who, so these 40 hertz sounds, if you just play, a sine wave is just the frequency with no harmonics. So if you just play a sine wave at 40 hertz, I can't sing a sine wave, but it doesn't have much impact. It's very low. You can hardly hear it. So it has to have some spectrum over it. We did research on what kind of spectrum. It turns out it's kind of a square wave, distorted. So it sort of sounds like, kind of like that. So it's not that great to listen to. So we did research in how you could combine that with other sound. And actually I have one student who you just give it an MP3 file, and it'll take some music that you want to use, and it carves out the parts of that spectrum that allow you to then put the gamma spectrum back in, so and you can balance it so that you hear the gamma more prominently, or the real music. So we're trying to research what balance you need. Do
you have an example with you? You have gamified.
I do, actually. I've got a little short example. I've been experimenting with this in different contexts, but I wrote a piece about 9 months ago for the Kronos Quartet, for string quartet and electronics. And these gamma frequencies are through the entire piece. And it's meant to, we researched it to make sure that it had enough effect through the piece to stimulate your brain, but also that it was interesting to listen to and it becomes more or less prominent. So this is just 30 or 40 seconds. If we play it at a reasonable volume, you'll hear the gamma sneak in, and it'll clear out your brain, 40 seconds. It'll be good for the next week, you'll see. Anyway, if you have that. Can you do louder? Anyway, I'm writing a version of that piece with Renée's voice.
So
I think
how
we're
is
going to
that-
do that, actually.
At Berkeley, we're going to do
They
it.
just wrote, after all, yeah.
Amazing. So how is that done live? Can you break that down for us, just in terms of what we were just hearing?
Really, really simple live. So it's the quartet plays. They play kind of normal music. They also play timbral stuff, but they're just amplified really well. And then the electronics are. It's pretty simple, actually. The Kronos. Are you in there 50 for the Future project?
I'm not.
No, I see your name everywhere. I thought. Anyway, the Kronos commissioned 50 pieces, mostly for young string quartets, as a kind of new repertoire for. And all the pieces are put online for free. It's really fantastic. So they asked me to write a piece in this series, and they said, do something with electronics, but it's got to be like a 10-year-old could do it, and so there were a lot of constraints. Mm-hmm. So for this piece, the version that we usually do has a bunch of segments of electronics that I prepared ahead of time that we can mix live, but there's nothing, it's not improvised, but you can mix different parts of the spectrum. They all start at precise times, so when it git's to that point in the score, the next segment gets triggered.
And you're actually doing the live triggering?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's actually technically quite simple. What was not simple was to make the electronics in the studio and balance them and figure that out. But it's pretty easy to play, actually.
Very
I
cool.
thought there'd be a foot pedal that one of the string players would be able to enact, because you'd have to cue it, right? They have to conduct in a way and say, this is the next downbeat.
They do, and yeah, so that's a whole lot. Foot pedals are great, but I usually like my Schoenberg and Hollywood opera is going to Vienna in a few weeks, so I'm going this week to start rehearsals. And getting, I usually do something where if they're, like in a piece like that, there may be 1,000 or 2,000 things that have to get set off at a certain time. And the problem with a foot pedal is that the only way you can go with a foot pedal is forward. So, the next one's coming and somebody goes like that. And there's a pretty large probability that it's either not going to happen at the right time or it's going to go 2 or 3 ahead, and then if it's like the wrong one, then. So I like to have every single thing on some separate, so it might be on a 88-note keyboard, and then you get to the next section and you go to the next 88. So, yeah.
Taking some of the chance out that it's going to go wrong.
Yeah, I like to not have chance that it'll go wrong.
Before we open up for questions, which I think is very soon, I just want to zoom out now with my last question, which is about, I think I mentioned when Skip was asking this question, we often talk about building bridges, right, from emerging to professional life, and everyone is really concerned about that. But very little is talked about the construct of a life. What does it mean to have a life in which you evolve, in which different interests come about, in which you can stay open to the unexpected beauty and complexity that comes with being, an artist for a whole life, not for 10 years, not for 15 years. Can you both talk about just something in terms of how much of this you had planned, how much of it was unexpected, and just some advice for those in the room that are building careers in such different ways?
It's evolved and changed dramatically in my career time. And for most of my career, I would say 2/3 of it, I was really discouraged from branching out because it was felt that it would dilute the sort of elitist quality of that classical music at this level has. And certainly, no crossing over with other people, other genre, other types of collaborations, and even new music was somewhat discouraged, I would say, unless it was a certain type and commissioned by a certain group. So those barriers are all gone. They are completely gone. And they're gone for partly a difficult reason, which is that people are willing to try anything now to revive the interest in classical music. And but I still think on the grassroots level, which is your level, on the creative level, the opportunity is tremendous. And certainly for a life as a creator and a life in the arts, in some way, it's so rich, it's so wonderful. I mean, does our society 100% value what we do? No, unless,
do you think about failure with risks that you take?
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Do you consider failure when you're taking risks in terms of going into new directions?
I do consider failure, and I'm careful in some respects. There are certain things I would avoid. I mean, it really has to do with integrity, I think. You maintaining a certain level of integrity, or at least my own belief in what I'm doing. And I know that some of the things that I do, a percentage of people in the business and to some degree in the audience will say, that was a really bad idea. Why is she doing that? But then I don't care. I do it for myself. And in fact, I was even encouraged early on to specialize in 2 composers. And by people who are really knowledgeable and powerful in the business. And in other words, to become a specialist. Right. That would be my best bet of maintaining a sort of critical nod. And I just rejected all of that. I just said, look, it's my life, and I want to have experiences that I find meaningful to me, and I want to grow, and I'm curious. I want to try new things all the time, which is what I've done. But
Yeah.
Does it make it harder for people to sort of say who you are? Yes. And do they like that? No. They don't like it.
And how much do you think about health in your everyday life, especially with this initiative? How does it relate to your daily practice?
I'd like to think about it more. I would really love the more that we can network and create a body of work that is known by more people. I mean, people don't know, for instance, that you can, in one session with a music therapist, having had a stroke, you can regain your speech. And there's so many people, I'm sure, who've had strokes who never speak again because they don't know that through singing you can regain speech if you're kind of trained in the right way, and it happens very quickly. So certain things like this, I just would love for more people to understand it.
Absolutely. And then Tod, I feel like you're working in a system in which there is a regenerative model in terms of the students, and I imagine there's a real influx of ideas and just it sounds like a very fertile ground. Can you talk a little bit about just the life that you've created and any kind of pointers, anything I like to use the word demystify, because I feel like when I was in school, the obscurity with which I walked into life was just, it was a shame. It didn't need to be that way. And so I imagine that's something that you probably think about as an educator.
Yeah, so just a few things. I think, well, first of all, I wanted to point out that I think Renée is one of the most courageous people I know, to be that, the most prominent singer in her field, and then to decide to branch out and do, it's not something you had to do. Yeah. And you said it, but it's not something that's easy to do, and, we all are just so thankful. I mean, for me, it was easy. Nobody cares what I do, so I can. But she said the word curiosity, and I think that's kind of the core of it. I mean, I think you wouldn't, if you're artists, you're fundamentally curious about viewing something differently. You know, it's probably just a natural thing. I mean, I think from when I was a little kid, you know, I just always wanted to learn things, and always felt like there was always something more to know and something more to understand and something more to make. And I think in fact I'm sure that all of you have that quality, or you wouldn't be artists, you wouldn't be here. I think the hardest thing to do, like when I go into elementary schools with kids who have never been asked to, you know, take a risk. The hardest thing to do is for kids who've never been invited to be curious to light that spark. Because once you have that spark, you know, the rest follows. And I mean, the only really general advice, and then I'll talk a little bit about working with a group of people. The only general advice I say is also probably something you know already, but it's just that, you know, your job is to find out your special vision and what you're especially curious about, each of you, and then just to follow that kind of no matter what happens, because nobody's going to make it easy for you. And kind of the more original your vision, probably the harder it is going to be to get people to, you know, the great visions are things that aren't easy necessarily for other people to grasp right away because they're different from what somebody else sees or hears. And the more you can constantly, every single month, every single year, find out what it is about you that you care about and that's special. That's what you have to follow. It doesn't matter what anybody else does about that. And for me, it was funny because I think I'm a cellist, so I love performing. I'm interested in philosophy and politics, lots of things. But actually, when I decided that composing was what I wanted to do, it was actually because to this day, I love being on my own in my studio with nobody bothering me, with just hearing what I have in my head and working on it. But by weird just circumstance, when I was at Juilliard, I started realizing that the stuff I was hearing in my head was kind of weird, and I couldn't necessarily make it with traditional instruments. And I decided to learn technology because I thought that was a way to take what was in here and make it real. So I started programming and making instruments, things I never expected to do. And because of that, I ended up needing to work with other people who knew even more about some of these areas than I did. So from being kind of I love being alone in my studio, but a lot of my time is spent with a lot of other people on projects with a lot of collaborators. And the thing I like most about being at MIT, and it's a particularly, one of the nice things about MIT. Is anybody here from Harvard? I hate to keep saying things about Harvard, but yes?
Yeah,
no?
these two
No.
over there.
Over there? Mm-hmm. No, but it happens to be a place. It happens to be a place.
It's my daughter. Sorry.
Oh, I see. Anyway, it happens to be a place that attracts. It's a real meritocracy, so it attracts a lot of first people in a family to go to university. It's a very unentitled place. So it's a place where people are not, it's true, people aren't necessarily very pretentious, so people are kind of open. And so I've gotten into the habit of, I try to assemble a group of young people who I really like and think are really talented, but also who I think are open and nice. And so I often, if you'd asked me 20 or 30 years ago at what point of a project I would feel comfortable going and working on my students, telling my students what I was doing, a while ago, I would have probably gone in there when the score was almost done or when, at least I had the plan made. Now one of the great pleasures is going in with a group of people and talking about something like the day I had the idea, or to talk about something where the idea is not clear at all, and I want to develop something together. And it's not the same as, there's some times where I really just want to get off on my own. But I love being in a place where I can, I don't feel, I don't know.
Is it that you trust yourself or you trust them more?
Say again?
Is it that you trust yourself with those ideas in terms of being, able to share them at such an early stage, or you trust them more? Is it that kind of mutual trust that you've built?
I think it's a mutual trust, and I think it's a feeling that not every idea, but some ideas just blossom more if you share them really early on. And there's another kind of, I remember as a dad, I don't know if I learned this from my parents or whatever, but our daughters would, I think it's partly being curious. I always think that there's something more to learn. So often when my daughters would say, Dad, how do you, what's the answer to that? You know, I don't know. What does this mean? Or my response was usually, you know, I'm not sure. Let's figure it out. Or do you know? Or let's think about it. I mean, so I just kind of don't assume that I know more than they do. And actually, I usually don't, so.
Well, I'm going to open it up for a sec because I know there's a lot of people who want to ask questions. But it's amazing to see two humans who balance their inner muse with also not just curiosity, but a generosity that is really deep.
I have this belief also that doors open. If you have an idea and you think it's a good idea and you start step by step to pursue it, I just really believe that the universe rewards us for that, that the inquiry, for the collaboration, and you do have to surround yourself by like-minded people who are generous, open, have the same cultural relationship to work and working together. And and in short, certain doors close and then other doors open. You know, and you'll find, like for instance, this thing has led me now to a new project that's looking at neuroaesthetics. I'd never even heard of it. I didn't even know what it was. So, and some of it's the study of beauty, you know, what our relationship to beauty is. So the scientific inquiry around the arts I find fascinating. And it's endless. It's like learning music. It's endless. You can go on and on. Yes, I'd love more questions.
I mean, I have a few tricks, but go ahead.
Because you're in education, you should speak to that. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's...
You're both composers.
I think it's finding... I mean, I'm going to let them speak because I think... But just in terms of one thing that I've found is find the things outside of your discipline that keep you healthy. You know, and don't forget that, like, having a life outside of your discipline is the whole reason you're a writer. You know, you're not put on this world to write. You're put on this world to write about things that happen, which means those things have to happen. And so I think that's kind of a side of life that we don't talk about. And then letting out, and like I found boxing a couple years ago, and it was a huge release of stress. And it was the thing that I needed, you know, in order to release anger. And so just finding the things that work for you, and then just not feeling like you don't have time because you have to do other things, because really you do have time. You know, you have a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, do you change schools? I don't know. No, no, because the environment's very different at different places, and I think, you know, I went to Juilliard as a composer, and I mean, I liked it there, but you know, it wasn't as an environment. It definitely wasn't a place that encouraged kind of a full life or lots of, I don't know what school you go to, but I mean, one of the nice things about a place like MIT, it's weird, you know, some days I wake up and say, God, I wish there were more composers here, or I wish everybody was like Renée Fleming, you know, and I often feel that way, but it's also fantastic to have people who are really curious about neuroscience or about, you know, some engineering thing or about literature, or, you know, all, you know, being creative in different areas. It's very refreshing to have people look at kind of a core thing you're interested in from a very different point of view. So I think, you know, that goes back to what Paola said. I mean, it could be just having a group of friends who are outside of the, you know, the composition department or something, you know.
And I think experience is really helpful for inspiration. I mean, I'm directing an opera next year, and the only reason I took it on is because I went to a hockey game, which is not a typical activity for me.
What's that connection?
Never, yeah, not typical. But I started thinking about the fact that this seemed to be a war of the sexes, that the audience loved the fights more than they loved the game. And in fact, I felt the players were actually encouraged to brawl, and there was a sense of fun with it. So it's those outside things. And so as I've toured throughout my entire career, I'm a culture fanatic. So I go to theater all the time, and I go to museums all the time, and I love natural beauty. So you have to make time for yourself. And I get down if I don't. Yeah. I really feel flat if I don't make time for the other things.
Say something else that's funny. It's related, which is that, you know, of course, if you're a composer, you know, we love music, of course, and we listen to it all the time. But, you know, other music is often suffocating, or it's you know, you listen to something that's great, and well, how could I add to that, or what could? So no, but often you see something in a completely different art form, or just something on the street, or where you go, oh, I see a kind of behavior, or I see something, expression in somebody's face, or I heard a sound on the street. And boom, that's what that movement should sound. I think it's very stimulating to get ideas from totally contexts that aren't literally what you're actually doing.
Yes.
I had a question about, we sort of touched on saying no to projects, and I had a question about what makes you say yes to something, especially projects that are, that stretch you outside of what you're comfortable with. I'm specifically thinking of Norma Jean Baker of Troy, which I loved.
Oh, great.
Like how that was pitched to you and what made you say yes to that, especially when you're talking less about sort of like singer repertoire questions, because I feel like that's something that's discussed so much in school, is when to say no to those kinds of things, but also when and how and why to say yes to other kinds of projects.
Well, for me, it's always been very instinctual. This is a project that was the opening of The Shed with Ben Whishaw, the actor, and Ann Carson, the poet. And Katie Mitchell was directing it, and Katie, this director, who I admired, wanted her own composer to create the music. And so I basically sang through, I would say, 2/3 of the show. And Ben morphed into Marilyn Monroe. It was probably the most artistic thing I've ever done. Also terrifying. So I say yes to things that are intriguing to me, that are it's an intuitive decision sometimes, and the career considerations, money, all of those things are lower on the list for me, over time. Of course, I had to spend 15 years career building, and that was saying yes to the right things that fit in the cookie cutter model of what an opera career looks like. And opera singing is no question the foundation and the basis for my success. But this was a huge step outside of all of that. And when I do that, typically in the preparation process or just before we start rehearsals, I'm regretting it hugely, thinking this was a mistake. What was I thinking? I never should have said yes to this. It's too hard. It's too scary. It's too. And then, and that continues really until opening night. And then I'm always glad. I never regretted. There's very little that I've regretted taking on over time. But I love the challenge. I like being challenged, and I like doing new things. I'm not a repeater, and a lot of artists are repeaters. They want, there have been very famous singers who are historic singers. Luciano Pavarotti could not read music, and he sang the same few roles. Eventually he sang them lower, but it was the same repertoire. And I'm so grateful for him and his voice and his contribution. So there are lots of ways to be an artist. I just have one short story about that. Caroline Shaw wrote a piece for me a couple years ago, and I always collaborate with composers on text, choosing text, and on... And typically I get a piece that's in a vocal form that I just want to modify to some degree to make it a better fit for me. And so after some of this back and forthing on the piece, she said, Renee, you should just co-write from now on. This is what we're doing now. We write and compose in groups. And of course she's talking about some of the work she's done with Roomful of Teeth and things like that. And of course even her work with Kanye West, et cetera. So that's one way. And I do think collaboration is so rewarding. You can't just work alone all the time.
And that's kind of, I think, part of the issue with the Western canon. It's very specific to the Western canon, which is that, this idea of the myth of the single genius. And, that doesn't have to be anymore. I mean, collaboration is a huge part of all of our lives and how we create. And I think demystifying that and taking ownership over crediting, over, these are very important conversations that are going to actually change the perception also of how you can exist as a musician in a really positive way.
Do you have a sort of incubator situation here? Do you encourage this here as well?
I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is create a community, absolutely. So, in this room, there are people from very many different walks of life. We have our program at Juilliard. We have our residency program.
Do you collaborate together, you and this group?
So they meet in the workshop setting. It would be amazing. I think the collaborating could happen if we had multi-year residencies, but at the moment it's really about taking their vision and helping it come to life. And the community aspect happens, for example, with these workshops where they get to meet people such as yourself. We had Liz Lerman in here, who's an amazing MacArthur-winning choreographer who talked about critical response. How do you deal with criticism as an artist? How do you create a positive forum around that? And so again, kind of demystifying aspects in order to create a healthier community amongst us, because I think a lot of that learning doesn't happen in school. I'm not sure I think that the entire training system would have to change in order for it to exist in school, but it's very much our raison d'être here.
And I love the idea, too, that you can work with people from other art forms and collaborate in that way to just bring in other elements to the performance. But
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And frankly, I think in the future, and something you should all think about, is how to collaborate with the audience.
Well, so that's something that I think it seems that's the key for you with this initiative.
Well, I just think it's so we don't do it enough. And the future, one thing that sparked my curiosity about this is the fact that Opera America did a study, and the results of the study said that future audiences do not want to sit in rows and seats.
Yeah.
The only reason they're going out is not to have an artistic experience, but to spend time with friends and family.
Yeah.
And so it needs to be social, and it needs, ideally to have tables like this.
Kevin, my co-founder with me, his reason for creating the space was actually all about the audience. And my reason for creating the space was all about the artist. As an artist, like, how can I heal a system that's broken? But for him, it was about being able to have a drink, being able to invite friends. How can you, have, for example, a new artist on the stage that may not have an audience and still feel dignified in terms of having only 20 people in the audience so that it still feels good. And I think, the more that I'm finally finding my own stability, like I understand the importance of that, whereas when I was younger, it was really just laser focused on trying to heal a system, but you can't heal a system without an audience, so it's an interesting point.
Well, I would love at this point, because I spend most of my time concertizing, which means programming. I do my own programming.
Well,
and I would love to poll the audience in advance and find out what they want. This has been a big question my whole career. What does the audience want?
So
what do they want to hear?
There's this social impact group that I'm working with in Copenhagen, and they created these sensors for seats so that during a performance, this was very specific to an actual performance about mental health, people could actually respond and interact with which is a little different from what you're saying, but I found it so fascinating, that there was this real desire to kind of pull the actual reaction of the audience during the piece, and then it would actually change certain perceptions of lighting, and so it was a very interesting system that wasn't actually difficult to build.
Yeah,
So.
and actually part of the reason to do the city symphonies is to have an entire community participate, but also be aware of how a piece is developing over a year before they actually hear it, so that when they get there, half the audience has actually contributed something, and everybody else has heard parts of it come to life. Yeah.
Well, and I think part of healing the system again is, like, for us here at Sawdust, a huge part of why we don't celebrate things like the 19th Amendment is that we celebrate it every single day. And so this idea of like gender equity and trying to see on our stage, make sure that people in the audience see themselves on stage is such a huge part of fixing, again, a system that has been broken for so long. So it's just, that's also part of the community building is building a new future that looks different.
Well, Paola is my hero. Paola is, since day one, I am just so in awe of her, everything that you do. This alone would be a huge undertaking, but then you're a mother, you're a wife, and you're a brilliant composer, first and foremost. I mean, you're amazing.
Okay. And thank you. That's kind. I think we had a couple more questions. Gemma, you had a question? Not to put you on the spot, but I saw your hand. I have a good story on failure. So when I wrote my first opera, it was when there was this amazing platform called Vox, New York City Opera Vox, and I wrote this piece, and I was really proud of it. It was with Helga Davis, and I was exploring improvisation in opera and so on and so forth. And I was on the program with some of my favorite, who have now all become very famous composers. So Missy Mazzoli, David Little, Du Yoon, all of us were on the same program. And I remember after the show, I was so happy. I was like, God, this went well. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to get a good review. And I remember holding my 9-month-old son at the time, and I finally got the review weeks later, and it was the worst review that you could ever imagine. To make it worse,
I got the worst review.
It was, it had gruesomely racist overtones. They compared it to The Lion King, which was also hard to accept because there was only one black woman on stage, and it was in my piece. But also, they said the piece was meant to be aborted. So it was a bad review, and it was something that took me, I'm not going to lie, years to recover from, because it was so public. I mean, you can say nobody read it, but the fact that I was reviewed amongst 5 other people, everybody read it. So what I did was it took me a year to actually recover. And I think people don't talk about that. They say, oh, don't worry, it's not going to hurt you. It does hurt you. And the system can work against you in those ways. So I think often when you do have those kinds of real public failures, realizing that you can call people, because a lot of people have had failures, they just don't, you don't publicize it because it just hurts you. But you do eventually recover. It's a question of just not believing in the things that people see in you that aren't true. You have to be your biggest advocate. It's the hardest thing to believe, but you can recover. But it is really hard. And there are going to be those moments where you feel like you can't make it. And usually in those moments, I sleep. And it's like, it's my own system of like, when I can't, like I never make a decision when I'm not ready. And that can be very frustrating to people around me. And yet when I know what to do, I do it. And I sleep when I'm really down. But those things happen.
So I have to tell you, because I went to a sports psychologist at one point when I was dealing with the whole stage fright thing. And he said, you have to filter everything. You cannot allow yourself, because people are going to want to bring you down. Everybody will. It's just human nature. And so I really don't read reviews. They are interpreted for me actually, my husband's really good at it. He is so good at it. He knows what to tell me, what not to tell me. And I know from what he says if something was bad or good, but I don't have a horrible phrase or a sentence that sticks in my mind and affects me for over a long period of time.
Do you deal with social media at all? Like in terms of a personal relation?
Not directly. Because that can be people really, oh my gosh, when they're anonymous, it's just unbelievable the vile behavior that comes from that. So no, I do not subject. You have to protect yourself.
Yeah. Find ways to,
I'm also a huge fan of cognitive behavioral therapy, because we all, and that helped me immensely too, we are all prone, we're sensitive. And I'm from the group of ruminators, which, is a common thing, and we're just very much prone to being held hostage by our own distorted thinking. And so having the tools to be able to combat that is incredibly helpful. And it was David Byrne's book. It's a silly book. It's written in a silly way called Feeling Good, but it's a good website. And it's just helped me a lot.
And actually, just one other thing, I think, Gemma, you were here for the Liz Lerman workshop, but she has a great system in dealing with critical response, which is it's such a great way to but it's such a great way to internalize.
I just got invited to talk at a new conference. I think it's the second year next month in Boston. It's kind of like the TED conference, but the conference is called Fail, and the whole conference is, they asked me if I wanted to speak, and they said, all the speakers, you're invited to come and talk about your biggest failure, and that's what everybody gets up. No, that's what because we're in a society where everybody tries to rate everyone else, and everybody tries to stigmatize people for failure, rather than what the opposite should be: encourage people to be bold and to take risks, and encourage people to do great things, assuming that a lot of what you do. So this conference for everybody is tasked. I think there are, a couple of thousand people come to this, mostly, I think, students and academics, because they want people to see that you can't do anything worthwhile if you don't stick your neck out, and, things are going to fail for all kinds of reasons. And maybe that's the thing I respect most about being at MIT, and especially at the Media Lab. I remember when I got there, I'd come from working with Pierre Boulez at IRCAM, and, Boulez was a great guy, but that was a place where, everything was about, cutting people down, and that's not good enough, and that's not good enough. And it's just true. A lot of the music profession's like that. And when I got to MIT, there were all these people who were, doing crazy things and well known, but had been out on a limb a million times and criticized. Half the people thought they were idiots, and a few people thought they were really great. And so you got to fail. If you're not failing, you're not taking big enough risks.
I think we have time for one. No, we're done. We have time for one more. Any burning questions? Because this is a beautiful note to end on. We could end right there. Thank you so much. It means a lot to us. It means a lot to me personally. I'm very grateful to you both.
Thank you, Paola.